Tell me a bit about yourself and your background in sports psychology.
Okay, so it's probably twofold. I've been a track athlete for many, many years, and that's probably where my interest started. I think pretty early on, I started paying attention to athletes around me, watching them, seeing how they reacted to performance failure and reacted to performance success. That got me interested in the psychological side of sport, the emotional side of the whole experience. So I started studying it in school, started doing research in sports psychology, and that eventually progressed into some more applied work. So working with some of the varsity teams at U of T, and I've loved that experience. So my interest has just grown from there.
You seem passionate about sports psychology. Where does this come from?
I really think it comes from some of my beliefs around being a competitive athlete. So I really believe to be able to perform optimally and get the most out of this experience, you have to be in a positive place and have happiness, but more importantly, be emotionally prepared for the pressures and the challenges and the anxiety that comes with competing at this level. And there's only so much you can do in your physical training to make you as prepared as possible. Absolutely, it can give you confidence and make you feel physically ready, but the emotional side, the really kind of human reaction to that kind of stress and anxiety comes from being mentally prepared. And that's where I think sports psychology is going to bring athletes to the next level, and I'm really curious and interested in how that works for individuals, how that can help athletes who get really maybe frustrated when their work doesn't translate into performance. That can be one of the most frustrating and really kind of devastating things as an athlete, to not be able to show off your work, show off how hard you've worked. And if that is something to do with psychology or something to do with mental preparedness, and we can help athletes with that and help them optimize their performance and really get the most bang for their buck in terms of how dedicated and how committed they are to the physical work, then I think that's really amazing.
You have experience working with teams. Tell me a little bit about what you found that works well and what doesn't.
Right, so working at a broad program level across multiple teams, trying to access the most athletes possible, what we know doesn't work to do that is one-off seminars. So, having a topic, having a certain amount of skills, and just teaching the athletes in that kind of one-off experience. It's probably better than nothing, but really what it does is attracts the athletes who are either really struggling and looking for a kind of a last resort solution to whatever they're struggling with, or it attracts athletes who are just generally very interested on their own and they're curious about what we have to offer. But really with these skills, we want it to be just as integrated as physical training. And we want it to reach everyone on the team, right? Every athlete to have exposure so that they may pick up something that they hadn't even thought of, but that might be very helpful. So that one-off situation, that one-off seminar style isn't very effective in the long term, and it doesn't ingrain the skills that the athletes need when it actually comes, weeks down the road to when they actually compete. So working off that, what we want to do is have a much more integrated approach.
Right, so tell me a little bit about this project, kind of what you've changed, and how did it all come about? Maybe let's start with the origins of it.
Sure, so I think there are a few different areas, and you and I both had experience with some of these things that made this seem like a good idea. So, I think first of all, we realized what didn't work.
Right.
And the setup that needed some tweaking. At the same time, both you and I separately had athletes coming to us kind of at the last moment, asking for support, asking for help on the psychological side of things in terms of preparing for performance, managing their performance anxiety when it came to a championship or really big meet coming up. And a week ahead of time, there's only so much you can learn. There's only so much you can develop psychologically as an athlete when the impending competition or an anxiety-provoking situation is coming up right then. So wanting to address that and meet the needs of the athletes that were asking for this support was a big inspiration for this project. Another thing was your experience and exposure to this kind of model with other teams. So at a slightly higher level, on national teams, seeing how sports psychology worked in those settings and what some of those practitioners were doing, I think really inspired you to figure out how to bring that kind of support to our athletes onto our team. And finally, I think just within competitive sport, there's more awareness about the importance of sports psychology, the importance of mental skills when it comes to performance. All of these athletes train very hard, they're all very talented, so there has to be something that separates, the good from the very best, or on the day, what separates these athletes. And I think that there's just generally more awareness in sport that mental skills and sports psychology is one of those things.
So your role is going to be as the mental performance coach, working alongside all of us coaches and the rest of the integrated support team, physiotherapists, strength and conditioning. Explain a little bit about how you're going to integrate mental performance into the athlete's overall training plan.
Right. So the idea of having me as part of the coaching team is so that mental performance in sports psychology is visible, accessible, and present, just as the other supports are. So the way we're going to integrate that is to have it line up with the periodization of training in general. So it's going to be a combination of workshop, education-based kind of teaching and skills developed as a group, in a group setting with the team at certain periods through training. And that's going to be followed up right away with practicing those skills in training. So creating opportunities to challenge those skills in training, and that's where the rest of the coaches come in too, to implement that side of it, and also follow up. So there's going to be a lot of reflection and self-evaluation that the athletes are going to do, and not super time-consuming, but consistent and integrated into practice. And that reflection and self-evaluation is going to be reviewed by the coaching staff. So that includes the coaches such as yourself as well as me, and so that we can give some feedback. So track the athletes and how their skills are developing, just like we do with tracking their fitness or tracking their speed or strength. We'll see how they're doing and what's working for them, what isn't working for them. And that will help them figure out, once it comes to competition time, so at that phase in the training, what skills can they use on the day to help them perform optimally. So with that periodization, it's built right into their training program to have these skills they're present, they know them, and then they can practice them consistently.
And if the athletes needed some additional help, would they have access to you?
Yeah, so that's the next component as well. So once they've gone through this phase of learning and practicing these skills, then there'll be opportunities to work one-on-one with me. So there'll be a few hours per week where they have access to my schedule to book in, and we can work on some more individualized skills, individualized issues that the athletes are dealing with, or if they just want to keep working on the skills and optimize even further, or if they're preparing for something specific and they know that it's something that's going to add additional pressure or additional challenge to them, then that we can have that extra time to work one-on-one and more focused on their individual experience. So to figure out what kind of skills and what kind of content we're actually going to focus on, we brought this question to the team. We asked them how they thought sports psychology could benefit them the most. And the most consistent thing was to manage performance anxiety. So the first thing we're going to do is develop some self-awareness, some reflection to figure out what thoughts, what circumstances bring on the performance anxiety. But also do some education around optimal performance anxiety. So it's not necessarily always a bad thing. We want some nerves, we want some anxiety to give us that extra boost of energy, to give us that extra motivation. So it's figuring out what the optimal level is for the individual athlete, and that's where the self-awareness comes in. Then the next phase is tackling and controlling that performance anxiety, optimizing it. And the way we do that is with a number of cognitive and behavioral skills. So the mental stuff that's going on in our heads and the proper self-talk or the effective self-talk, imagery, things to keep you focused and on task. And the behavioral side, so the relaxation strategies, the things to bring our arousal levels down or energize us and bring those levels up when we need it. So it's a big mixture of cognitive and behavioral skills, and then individualizing it so the athletes figure out what works for them. So a really critical piece of this format is translating the education of these skills into practice and competition. And that's where we really need to bridge the gap in how effective sports psychology is for the team. So what will that look like? Essentially, we'll have about 3-week cycles where at the outset we teach the skills, or I teach the skills in that group format. The next week will involve the athletes practicing those skills in training. The week after that, there's going to be a challenge opportunity. So something that's worked into practice and that's developed by the whole coaching staff to figure out how to apply that skill in the moment. Then those athletes will reflect and review and self-evaluate right at the end of practice, so in real time. So what that'll do is create the opportunity to have an open dialogue, to have feedback between myself and the coaches and the athletes, to see how they're progressing through developing those skills, figure out what's working and what isn't. So the next phase, of course, is moving into the competition part of the season. Ideally, by this time, the athletes now have a toolbox full of the mental skills that they know work for them. So it's a new challenge, though. Hopefully we emulate the challenge of competition as much as possible in training, but it's always a little bit different. So the athletes will be encouraged to keep self-evaluating and have that feedback back from the coaches and keep that cycle going so that they hone their skills over the course of the competition season. The hopes for this project and what we're targeting, I think, is threefold. First of all, that this brings sports psychology and mental skills to the forefront of athletes' minds, that it helps them realize that it's something that should be prioritized and something that they can work on just like their physical skills. Another important target is that it helps optimize their performance, that it helps them bring the hard work that they do in training and really show that off when it comes to competing. And finally, and equally as important as those things, are my hope that it'll help athletes feel supported, that whether they're really struggling with performance failure or they're just trying to optimize their best performance, that this will show the athletes that the coaching staff cares about that and we're doing everything that we can to help them. I'm really excited about this project. I think the potential benefit that it'll have for the athletes and the team is really going to be cool to see. As personally as an athlete and what I've seen in other athletes is just how discouraging it can be for your hard work not to translate into performance success. And so if we can help the athletes add that last kind of one more critical piece of the puzzle to help them optimize their performance, I think it's going to be really exciting.